Hello and welcome to the Football Diary podcast, where we're here to talk you through our summer, really. And the main event of all of our time at the moment seems to be transfers and the news that we see floating around social media, Sky Sports, wherever you might find it. We're going to give you our opinions on everything that seems to be going on right now. I'm joined by Mike. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, good to see you, mate. It's been a few weeks we've been away, hasn't it? So it's good to be back.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a while since me and you have recorded together. We've been bouncing off Dave between us, really. So good for us to have a chat. And that's what we're here to do, really. Just have a little chat about what's going on right now. And I wonder where you think we could start, Mike. What's caught your attention recently?
In terms of transfers, there's a lot of big business happening already. We've already spoke about Haaland going to City, haven't we? We've been the big one. Nunes going to Liverpool, we know is going to be a decent deal. But I think Spurs business has caught my eye. I don't know about you. They've got Richarlison now, and they've already got a really attacking lineup anyway, haven't they? We've already said Kane, Son, Kulusevski is one of the best trios we've seen in a while. Let's stick Richarlison in the mix. I'm impressed with that. What about you?
It's a really interesting shake-up of that Spurs front line that was already so successful. And it's rare that you see a team like Spurs strengthen from a position of strength. I think it really
Yeah,
shows the backing that Conte has. They obviously identified a few areas that they needed to sort out, one of them being wing back, and they brought in Perisic. And it looks like they're also going to bring in Jed Spence. So it's pretty successful. Basuma in the midfield, I think that's a
yeah,
great one. And I actually think the signing of Richarlison might cover two positions. The backup to Kane as a striker, potentially. We know that
yeah.
Spurs have been looking at that for a long time. But also, Spurs have now got a very defensive midfield. They've got Basuma, they've got Bentancur, and they've got Højbjerg. I wonder if signing Richarlison
Mm.
enables Kane to drop a bit deeper and act as their new playmaker, because you see him do that in game anyway, and then they've got these fluid wingers that can get in behind. But I wonder if it
Yeah.
enables Kane to almost play as a number 10 with Richarlison there.
Maybe. I think that's the options that Conte's looking for because he was quite restricted, but with his starting 11 initially, wasn't he? But the players he's signed have added so much strength and depth. And I think Basuma is one of the steals of the season so far. Like, was it
Yeah,
25 million for Basuma? There's a few clubs would have benefited from having him in their midfield, United being one of them, to be fair. So
yeah,
that's a really decent extra addition to their team. I'm impressed all round with them listening to Conte's needs because these are
yeah.
all very Conte signings, and you said Perisic as well. Like that wouldn't have come and the many other managers, but he's really identified somebody he trusts and somebody who can perform that wing back role really well. I'm surprised they let him go. To be fair to Spurs,
But they still need more, I think, with Spurs. I think last season they ended up playing Ben Davies as a left-sided centre back for quite a long time in the second half of the season. Eric Dyer had a much better season at centre back.
mm.
I wonder whether Conte is completely trusting of him. I definitely think centre back is somewhere that Spurs need to address. They've been linked
Yeah,
with Skriniar over the last 2 years, but it looks like he's on his way to PSG now. Koulibaly could be available, maybe. There's talk of Bastoni over from Inter Milan, but I can't see that one happening.
no.
Do you think Spurs will have to dip back into the market again, though?
I'm sure they're actively looking, mate. And I think centre back, like you say, is one of them places where Conte probably looks at his starting 11 and thinks, do you know what? If we have an injury or two, we're going to struggle. So who they sign, I don't know. I mean, Conte's got plenty of contacts, hasn't he, in Serie A? And he feels like he's flexed that quite a bit so far since he's become Spurs manager. So I'm curious to see. Bastoni would be an interesting one. I'd like to see him in the Premier League.
And I think they've got to shift a few players still as well. And Dombele hasn't made his move to Lyon permanent. He's back training with Spurs at the moment. Lo Celso obviously is back around as well. Brian Hill. They've just sold Steven Bergwijn, it looks like, to Ajax, which I actually think is a bit of a shame for him. I would have liked to see him in the Premier League with a good run of games because I actually think he looks like a really good forward. But good to see him going back to Holland at least, I suppose. But it's an interesting one with Spurs. They're developing quite an interesting squad and quite a
Yeah.
strong squad. I wonder if all of a sudden they might have leapfrogged Chelsea. They seem miles ahead of where United are at
Mm.
right now, and obviously Arsenal have done a bit of spending as well. But Spurs look like they're the closest to challenging Liverpool and City right now. Is that fair to say?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, definitely. I think Spurs and even Arsenal, like you say, have taken this summer to really take stock of what they need, and they've acted on it. Chelsea have obviously been handicapped, haven't they, massively by restrictions. Waiting to see when they can make a move in the transfer market has really made them struggle, I think, to find who they need. Um, but yeah, I think Spurs and Arsenal are the two that seem to be more in a position to challenge for top four now than ever before. Chelsea are in danger of maybe sliding into that fourth place or maybe even fifth. But then again, a lot depends on what United do, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's two clubs there that we can talk about, and one thing will link them both together quite nicely. But I'll start with Chelsea because as of about 5-10 minutes ago, there's further reports of Raheem Sterling joining Chelsea. Looks like a £45 million move has been agreed, and Sterling has wanted to move there for a few weeks after talks with Tuchel. So, do you think that's the player that Chelsea need? Obviously, Lukaku's gone back to Inter, which, well, it's a disaster all round. And if the truth is to be told that the number 90 on Lukaku's back next season is a little homage to the amount of money Inter Milan have made off that deal, that's just amazing cheekiness. I love it. But Sterling to Chelsea, does that fill the gap that Chelsea have right now?
Well, it's a loaded question because you know the answer to it straight away. It's no. They need defenders. They need defenders fast because I'm thinking, who are they going to play now in centre back? You know, if Thiago Silva's injured, they're going to struggle. Yeah. I think you touched on it the last time we did the pod with Dave that the players they've let go would really fit in nicely at the minute. So Tammy Abraham would be a great addition to the team. Kurt Zuma even would be a great addition. And obviously Fikayo Tomori is playing great in Italy as well. Any one of them would slot into this Spurs starting 11. Chelsea starting 11 now. So they need defenders. They need them fast. I haven't seen them linked with anybody in the central defensive position. So I don't know what they're going to do. They must have some lined up.
Well, there's two players that I've seen mentioned a few times. Obviously, Jules Koundé has been linked for a couple of years. Barcelona are sniffing around that as well somehow. I don't know. Who knows how Barcelona think they're financing these moves, but hey. And the other one obviously is De Ligt. There's talk that Juventus would be willing to sell him for about 75 million. But we still don't really know what Chelsea's financial situation is. They also seem to have agreed a deal for Rafinha, but we're waiting on whether Rafinha actually wants to go there. Another one who's trying to get to Barcelona. Hasn't got the memo clearly. But if Chelsea have let Lukaku go, they've got Havertz as kind of a false nine, maybe a number 9. Timo Werner is a wide forward these days and hasn't really shone in that number 9 area. But Chelsea signed 2 more wingers where they have Hudson-Odoi, Pulisic. Hakim Ziyech looks like he's on his way to AC Milan. So maybe that's sort of one of the spaces freed up. But just seems odd to me that Chelsea are looking at 2 wide players, maybe.
Absolutely. It feels like they're just strengthening places that are actually doing okay, and doesn't it really? It's one of them weird conundrums where I'm sure if they had the whole summer to think of who to sign, they would have got the deals done quicker. I'm sure they've got people in the pipeline up front. And you mentioned in the podcast for your transfer special not long ago who they should sign. If you haven't seen it already, check it out. I'll stick a link on the screen. But yeah, striker is one place where they look particularly light now, isn't it? It's odd. I think they're putting all their eggs into the Kai Havertz basket and really hoping that he produces the kind of form they know he can. Because he can play false 9 pretty well, you know, as long as he's got the firepower around him. But the question is whether someone like Timo Werner will provide that ammunition for Havertz to shine. I don't think he will. I don't think Werner's got long in the Premier League. I really don't.
Well, there's one striker Chelsea are being linked with quite heavily at the moment. We've got to mention it, of course. Talk is Cristiano Ronaldo is, like everyone in the world of football, unimpressed with Manchester United right now, particularly their transfer business. And because of which, he said, okay, maybe the main bit of business you can do is selling me this summer. Not what we expected to be talking about this week, I imagine, Mike.
No, I think United's activity is interesting, isn't it? I think the fact that Ronaldo is making noises that he wants to leave, you can't really blame him in some ways. He's that age now where he wants to compete. I don't think Chelsea is a club where he's going to be competing for major honours at this stage of his career because they're in such flux as well. Yeah. So I don't know who Ronaldo would move to away from United to challenge and who could actually afford the kind of wages he's on. So I'm a bit surprised that he's come out from a PR point of view and said something rather than just dealt with it privately and tried to sort of engineer a move behind the scenes, because from a PR point of view, it doesn't look great on him. However, back to United, staggering amount of, staggering lack of activity so far still. They've also got Malacia from Feyenoord, which is good business. You know, he's not particularly expensive, fits the Ten Hag kind of model for how he wants his teams to play. Still not sure whether he'll play back up to Luke Shaw or whether he sees him as somebody to take that position and make it his own.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Because that could be an interesting change of dynamic for the first 11.
So I find that one really weird that the left back was the first signing of the summer when we
Yeah,
did see such amazing form from Luke Shaw 2 years ago. Alex Telles is still there as well and kind of came in and out of the side last year. And I think he's a quality left back on his day. Maybe not as defensively sure as Ten Hag would maybe like. But I thought it was odd that the first player that he would sign would be a left back. Obviously, Brandon Williams is also back, so it kind of suggests that he's going to move out on loan because I don't think he'll be your starting right back or left back now.
yeah.
So it's an odd bit of business. And I wonder if it's one of those ones where it's kind of business for the sake of business. It's a Dutch player. It's a deal that United could get over the line. And when people are moaning about their lack of activity, it's not really inspiring me to think United are going to go any further. I'm sure he's going to do very well for
No,
the club. I'm not criticizing him as a player at all. I think that he looks like a really dynamic left back, a good young player, but I just think it's a lack of strategy from Man United. And how many times have we had that conversation? To add to that, it looks like they've signed Christian Eriksen, a fantastic footballer. Again, not what United need right now, though. Surely he's Bruno Fernandes. That role is already taken in the team. If you are genuinely serious about Donny van der Beek playing next season, why are you signing another creative forward going midfielder? If you look like you're going to bring De Jong in, even although he can sit deeper than Eriksen would, again, dynamic forward thinking midfielder.
yeah,
It screams lack of strategy again, and it could not only cost Man United this summer in terms of addressing what they actually do need, but it could cost them Ronaldo as well. If he decides I don't like this business and wants to leave, yeah, you're right. Not many clubs could afford his wages, but he's had a 25% pay cut from United this year because they've not qualified for the Champions League, reportedly. So all of a sudden, his wages become a little bit more meetable. And if PSG decide they want to float some money at him, or Bayern Munich do sell Lewandowski, who
yeah,
knows?
yeah. Yeah, with United, it's a funny one because you'd imagine with a new manager, they'd have a whole new set of targets that they were trying to kind of achieve and to kind of sign to fit this new manager's philosophy, to fit areas where he sees the team to be weak from his system's point of view. And again, Eriksen, I think it feels like it's an opportunist signing because he's available, a bit like the Ronaldo one last season.
Yeah.
And again, is it Ten Hag that's making the call to get Eriksen on board? I mean, he's a former Ajax player, he's kind of that vein. But
Yeah.
yeah, who's he taking the place of? I mean, we've lost Juan Mata, we've lost Jesse Lingard. So in terms of like a creative attacking midfielders, he's an upgrade on those without a doubt. But we've got some creative attacking midfielders, and we don't need any more really. So it's the very centre of the park. United really need strength and depth, and we've got no one at the minute. Scott McTominay and Fred are still going to be starting at this rate, which is unthinkable. I think if United fans were going to pick any position they want direct action on in the transfer market, it would be in the middle of the park.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's nice to have a young upcoming left back. We don't need it though right now. It's probably one for the future. It's nice to have someone of the caliber of Christian Eriksen with the amount of assists he's got in the Premier League. It's just unthinkable to see him at arrival as well, So it is an opportunist signing if we get him, but we don't need him right now. There's so many other areas we could do with, and we're not linked with any of them. It's really frustrating. I can only hope we're doing business behind the scenes that isn't being publicised and that we're just quietly going about recruiting players that we genuinely need. But the Dave in me thinks that's not going to be happening.
It's such a weird one with United. I have a couple of lingering thoughts of United that who is their scouting department these days? Because it just seems like the laziest links in the world. You've brought in Ten Hag and you're just basically going, right, go back to Ajax and we'll move them to the Premier League and see what happens. And if they're not at Ajax anymore, but you've ever met them, we'll try and get them in as well. And I think that actually we could be in for a very David Moyes-esque summer where you spend your whole time chasing one player that doesn't come off in the end. Joan Laporta's come out again over the last couple of days and said, we do not want to sell De Jong. Sometimes you're forced into these things, but we want him to stay at Barcelona. He's come out again and said how much he wants to be part of Barcelona's project. Yet everyone seems convinced he's joining Man United. I'm not convinced that will happen. And then it might be another summer where you've not addressed the problem because you've put all your eggs in one basket and then maybe last minute you'll get something else done. Obviously, there's talk of Martinez, who can play as a holding midfielder, but is more of a centre back. Anthony's still being linked, but I don't know with United at the moment, Mike. They've got so much catching up to do already, and it feels like they're falling further behind.
It's the thing where you imagine Ten Hag coming in early like he did. I think he left Ajax after winning the league and then literally walked straight into Old Trafford, didn't he? Just to get business started early. So the signs early on were really positive. Where is that? Where's the rewards of all his hard work over, starting early in the job? And is he being supported? Is he having the players scouted that he needs? There's something wrong somewhere that's stopping him from getting the players that he needs to fulfill his squad. And it's just a sign of where we're at as a club, really, at the minute. It's just broken somewhere, isn't it? And it needs to change.
It's difficult, isn't it, with United? But I think that there are players available in this market right now that would improve this United side. And it's difficult watching, like you said about Basuma, it's difficult watching rivals for that top 4 place take them off your hands. So they do need to be more proactive, definitely. But there's no doubt that they've got the financial capability of competing still, even without Champions League football. I just hope that someone kind of pulls their finger out there and starts finding these replacements. They might do well to try and emulate Leeds, weirdly, who I actually think are doing great business. It'll be sad for them to have lost Calvin Phillips, local boy. Today they've announced the signing of Tyler Adams, who Jesse Marsch knows really well. I think he's a really good replacement. He's more athletic than Calvin Phillips. He's young. He's hungry to make it at that top level and has shown some real glimpses of promise at Leipzig and New York Red Bulls under Jesse Marsch. Do you think Leeds are investing this money well as a whole so far? Because I think this is the 5th player they've signed.
I think so. Yeah, well, he's obviously got for the American connection as well, because he's got Brendan Aronson as well, who's, again, a really good creative player. So he's filling that midfield with players that he knows and players that will suit the new direction he wants to go in. Maybe Calvin Phillips didn't fit that, who knows? But they've received a decent amount of money for him. And there's no doubt they need more players anyway. And I think it's probably a reality check that they're selling Phillips, because last season they were threadbare. The squad was really tested with COVID, if you remember. So it's not even just replacing Phillips like for like, it's replacing Phillips and then adding depth to about 5 different positions as well. So the money they've got from Phillips needs to be reinvested, and it looks like he's started to do that. And again, it looks like the Leeds board are backing him with players that he has identified as bettering his team, which is great. I think as a manager, you need that kind of support from the board to follow your philosophy. Take note, Glazers, please, as soon as possible. But fair play to Leeds. Identifying the players that they need and moving swiftly on from the departure of a really key player is what you need to do to make the fans kind of forget about it and move on, really. So well played.
And it seems pretty obvious that it won't just be one key player either, because Rafinha has got one foot out the door. We mentioned him with Chelsea earlier. Arsenal still lingering, and so Barcelona. But at this rate, you kind of trust Leeds to invest that money well. And I think that shows that they've had a plan all along, because there was talk that Jesse Marsch was being eyed even before it fell apart with Bielsa. And if his contract expired this summer, he was someone they were going to look to. And like you say, the fact that they're bringing in his players now, Leeds really needed to sort things out this summer. They were very, very close to going down last season. I think closer than they'll have been comfortable with, definitely. So it wasn't just a case of they need to maintain. They really needed to improve. And it's hard to do that when you lose 2 very key players. But it looks like they've invested that money in improving the whole squad. Now, that could go one of 2 ways. Villa spent the 100 million of Jack Grealish last year on Bailey, Danny Ings and Buendia. Would you say they got the same output from those 3? Well, probably not. So Leeds have got to be careful with jigging their squad. But I do really like a couple of the signings they've made. I think Tyler Adams could be a great player for the Premier League.
Yeah, I think Leeds, though, you've got to imagine that they've been preparing for Bielsa's exit for a while.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they were always thinking if Bielsa goes, there's a few players that would go. I also think midway through the season onwards last year, they were thinking of relegation. So they were contingency planning for that as well. So they've obviously identified players anyway, if Rafinha was going to eventually move on, and if Calvin Phillips was going to move on, who could they bring in on the cheap almost to kind of replace them? So they've kind of had a bit of an advantage in forward planning because of the Bielsa scenario, where he was always on like a rolling contract, wasn't he? Where he was always potentially going to leave. Turns out he was pushed in the end anyway. But it feels like they've planned for this kind of scenario anyway, where big players are going to leave for whatever reason, and it feels like it's paying off for them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the worst kept secret in the Premier League was announced officially on Monday as well. Gabriel Jesus has signed for Arsenal, officially their new number 9. I've had my say on it a little bit already. I wonder what you think, Mike. How do you see Jesus fitting in Mikel Arteta's team?
Well, he's seen him up close for a number of years, hasn't he? In the City setup, so I think he knows what he can bring. But I think he's not seen the. I don't think we've seen the best of him in City's lineup because he tends to play out wide, doesn't he? And I think they've tried to use him centrally, and he's not really produced the goals that anyone expected. And I think you've criticised him for his lack of goal scoring generally. I think at Arsenal, he's likely to be the main man, the main goal scoring threat, and I think that will play to his strengths. He's got a lot of creativity around him. He's a player that's got energy to burn. He's a player that doesn't mind a press, and I think Arteta needs that in his team as well for his team to function correctly. Lacazette wasn't a pressing player, or Bellingham wasn't a pressing player, but Jesus can be and will be. And I think if used correctly, he could get 20 goals this season. I think there's already been a flurry of bets on him being top goal scorer with Erling Haaland as well. Like the two of them are now joint sort of favourites with the bookies to be top scorer. So, yeah, well, last season, if you remember, there weren't that many outright goal scorers in the Premier League. So, he's the kind of player, if used correctly, could get a few. And I think this Arsenal team's so full of creativity. I've got high hopes for him, mate, honestly.
The only caveat I would throw out to that is Brazil 2018. He's their number 9, 0 goals. I rate him as a player. I think he's a very good footballer. I think he is very good for being fluid across an attacking 3. But because we've never seen a full season with him as a leading man at a top level club, I think it's really hard to assess where he will be. I don't doubt that he will have a successful first season. I think he'll get double figures of goals. I think the expectation of him, like you say, favourite for top scorer, that's mental to me. I don't think there's anything to say that he can live up to that, or that a player in an Arsenal shirt will live up to that this year. I can't see him keeping up with the likes of Haaland, Salah, Son still. It's an interesting one. I think it addresses a problem that Arsenal had, and that's good. That's what they need to do. But I don't know if it's as much of a banker as people are kind of assuming it will be.
No. I still think Arsenal are a striker short of where they need to be because Eddie Nketiah, for all his talent, isn't going to lead the line for them. I think if Jesus is not going to play 38 games of the Premier League season, who's going to play second fiddle to him? Is it going to be Nketiah? Or are they going to do the false 9 like City always trying to achieve? They're not really built for that, are they? So, yeah, they do need another striker anyway. I do think they've had good business so far in the transfer window, Arsenal. I'm impressed with Vieira. I think he's a good addition. So I think they've got the makings of a talented team, but first team only. I think beyond the first 11, it still looks quite light for them, which is probably going to be their undoing. And I'm sure they're going to address that, if not in this transfer window, then in January.
Yeah, it's a funny one with Arsenal to work out what business they still have left to do. Because obviously at the start of the window, one of the biggest names that was being touted for him was Tielemans. And that's gone very quiet. Now, Vieira has come in, and I think that does look like a good signing, another very dynamic player. But I just feel like there's a little bit of an imbalance still. They've not really addressed the fullback areas, and I think that would have been my focus this summer for Arsenal, along with that striker. They're in talks with Martinez from Ajax as well, but they've already got Gabriel, Ben White, Saliba has come back from his loan spell at Marseille. So is that really what they need to do? I just think Arsenal have still got a little bit of business to go if they want to compete on as many fronts as they're going to be on next year.
I think Arteta's got his favourite players. I think he likes his wing backs. I think he's invested in them, and he is actually physically invested in their progress. I think he believes in them doing well. The strength in depth there is still not great. I think Saliba coming back is a big plus. He had a brilliant season in France. I've always rated him quite highly, but for some reason, he was never given the chance in Arsenal, was he? Since he's been there, it's been a weird one for him, hasn't it? It's taken him for him to go away and come back again to actually get a starting berth, a chance at a starting berth. So I hope he gets more game time this season because I like the look of him. But on the verge of something good, I think Arsenal, they will get top 4, I think. And I think, well, we'll have a prediction show, no doubt, at some point in the future. Yeah, I think they will. And I think it will be at the expense of United and Chelsea at this rate. I think both Spurs and Arsenal look like, based on their transfer activity and the fact that they've not really got a huge amount rumbling in the background to distract them, they look like they could have a consistent season, which is, rare for both teams, let's face it.
I can really see Arsenal finishing maybe 7th or 8th this season, but winning the Europa League, for example. I would not be surprised if Arteta really went for a trophy this year and went for those cup competitions a bit more, because it's going to be a long season for them. Yeah. They didn't have European football last year, and they didn't quite make the Champions League, but they had a much better season. We're also about a month away from their All or Nothing series premiering, so I'm fascinated to see some behind the scenes of what's gone on there. Well, I'm hoping you'll indulge me, and we can move over to Italy for a little while, because there's a few really big names being batted around there that could potentially make moves over to England, or moving within Italy, or have moved to Italy. Starting with a club that maybe never learns its lesson. Juventus have splashed some big wages on some free transfers. We've never heard that before, have we? So Pogba looks like is Pog back part 2.
Yeah.
So after a successful 4-year spell at Juventus, they're trying that one again, and hopefully they can bring the best out of him after, I think we'd say, an underwhelming time at Man United. It also looks like Di Maria has signed a 1-year contract with them, because why not? I'm not convinced that's what Juventus need, another player on big wages. Of some experience, but he's still a very skillful player, has a lot to offer. So who knows? Maybe Serie A will be a good pace for him. Another one with Juventus that worries me, but that's me being biased. There's big talk of Zaniolo moving from Roma to Juventus. And Zaniolo made comments in the press about how he's always flattered with links to big clubs, which a lot of Roma fans didn't take very well. Roma is a big club. So all of a sudden, there might be a bit more of a willingness to sell a player that really they've stuck by for a couple of years now. He's had 2 major injuries early in his career. He's shown flashes of what he can contribute to that Roma side. His goal in the Conference League final, topping it off wonderfully. But now he's on Juventus and potentially Tottenham's radar, although it looks like if he was going to move, it would be to stay in Serie A. Is this the perfect kind of signing for Juventus in terms of a younger Italian player, someone that's very creative that could replace Dybala maybe? Or do you think it would be a big risk for Juventus bringing in a player that has had 2 very serious injuries early in his career?
No, I think he's a quality player. He's such a good player, and it's such a shame. I didn't realise he was linked with Juventus, to be honest, because I feel like the best option for him is to continue his education in Rome. It really is. But it's really at odds with the other transfers you've mentioned for Juventus, potentially Di Maria and Pogba. That's just a weird mix of philosophy, because if they're going to be spending big wages on foreign stars like that, they cannot then be bringing in the likes of Zaniolo, because they're not going to develop. I don't really think that's going to be a great philosophy for them long term. Definitely not. It sounds like such a quick fix to get back in sort of the top of the league and competing in the Champions League again, that it's a bit of a desperate kind of move for them. Has Pogba taken a pay cut as well from what he was on at United? I think he has, hasn't he?
It looks like it, yeah, but it's still going to be massive wages for Juventus, particularly in that centre midfield, where that's where they've invested so heavily over the last couple of years with the likes of Artur, Aaron Ramsey. They've obviously had Pjanic, Zacharias come in, Weston McKennie. They've just been invested so heavily in that area and not had anyone really click. There's talk that Weston McKennie might be a make weight in the deal for Zaniolo, which that would be one benefit for Roma. I think McKennie is a very, very good footballer. But this screams to me the same as the summer under Pirlo, where they brought in Kulusevski and they brought in Chiesa and they brought in a couple of younger players, and McKennie being one of them, but then also bring in Alvaro Morata. And you just think, if you really want to get back competing for the Scudetto, if you want to catch the Milan teams, if you want to keep ahead of Napoli and Roma and Atalanta, Juventus need to be a bit firmer in their goal. And obviously they've lost Chiellini this summer. It looks like De Ligt might move on as well. So they've got to address that somehow. That squad needs a lot of work. Zaniolo, I actually think, would make a great signing for them, because he would be a great attacking player to play with Chiesa behind Vlahovic. I really don't want to see him leave Rome, of course. I think it would be a real shame. Like you say, I think his development's been so strong in that city and at that club. He has been
Yeah,
loved by the fans, even if they're getting a bit tired of some of the comments he's made recently. And I think Mourinho really has taken a bit of a shine to him towards the end of the season. So that would be a shame. There are a couple of
yeah,
other players around Italy, and I mentioned one of them there. Paulo Dybala all of a sudden seems to be out of offers.
I
Now, how
know.
has a player of that quality not been snapped up? Inter Milan have pretty much come out and said they're happy with their attacking players now that they've got Lukaku. He won't be joining. There was talk of AC Milan. They've now signed Origi, and Ibrahimovic has just signed a new deal somehow, even though he's injured till the new year and will be 41 at that point. But it looks like he won't be moving there. There was brief talk of Marseille.
Yeah.
That's all of a sudden been thrown out. And I also surely he's higher than that level. Where does Dybala go now? Is he one for United, maybe?
Again, do United need someone like Dybala? I mean, his quality, don't get me wrong, but I mean, like you say, I think the answer is a lot of teams have got players already in positions that he occupies. So his options in Italy look fairly limited, don't they, if that's the
Yeah.
case? But he's a squad player at the very least who would add so much depth to one of those teams in
Yeah.
Serie A. It's
Yeah.
it's baffling he was let go in the first place because he's got so much to offer still. He's not 30 yet either, is he? Is he like 28, 29?
Yeah, but I think he does command quite high wages because there was a lot of talk of Roma looking at him. Obviously,
Yeah.
Mkhitaryan's gone to Inter Milan, so they've got a gap there. And if Zaniolo was to move on, between Domenico Berardi at Sassuolo and Dybala, there's a couple of really strong links for Roma. But I wonder
Yeah,
if Dybala might be pricing himself out of some moves as well.
definitely.
He's such a promising player and such a wonderful footballer to watch. He deserves to be at a big club still, surely.
I think, like you say, though, he didn't expect to be released at all in the first place.
Yeah.
He wants to try and get a similar kind of deal to what he's been on, and he's just not going to get that. So maybe he just needs to just bite the bullet and go, whoever needs me, I'm available. I'll just lower my terms and make it happen because he just needs to be playing football, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And one final player that Dave mentioned as a link to Chelsea, but it looks like he's on his way to PSG. Scamacca of Sassuolo has been thrown around this transfer market quite a lot as a player of real promise, and obviously had a great season last year at a club that maybe weren't expected to hit too many heights in Serie A. Him at PSG, does that make sense for you, or do you think there's a better suited club for him right now?
Again, in terms of his development, you know, he's only just really broke into the Italian national team, hasn't he? So
Yeah.
he's on the rise. So that kind of step feels like the wrong one. It really does. I think, well, they've got a new coach there at PSG, but they've got so many star players in attacking positions. How much game time is he going to get? I mean, the likes of Moise Kean have already been there and done okay. It's fair to say, it kind of reignited his career to an extent, but he hasn't established himself enough yet, I don't think, to walk into a team like PSG. I think he just needs to really get some really decent stats in Serie A, get his goal tally up, and really compete for the sort of top scorer title and go from there. Really, ambition is something that I think has ruined a few careers of people his age, and I don't want him to go down the same route. Really, it'd be such a shame.
Yeah, definitely. Well, across Europe, then away from the Premier League, are there any other moves that you've seen so far this summer that particularly interest you? Maybe the chaos at Barcelona trying to register as many free agents as possible, or anything
That's
else
it.
you've got?
I think Barcelona is the one I'm trying to figure out because obviously they've been linked with Lewandowski all season,
Mm-hmm.
which is a strange one. They've got Aubameyang already, so over 30 strikers, they've got their quota. They seem to have a project of sorts going on. They've got, what's it, Frank Kessié on a free, which is a great deal.
Yeah,
Which I don't know where that leaves Milan's midfield as well, because what a loss he'll be to them.
yeah,
So they've had some great players. It feels like they're linked with so many other players that just don't make any sense at all. So whether that's just smoke and mirrors to attract the players they actually want, I don't know. If it is, then hats off to Barcelona for playing the transfer market really well. But it's a weird one. Their situation at the moment, I'm struggling to see their philosophy, because they've got so many young, talented Spanish players as well, alongside the likes of Frankie de Jong, who seems to be keen to be part of that project. So where they go next in the transfer market needs to be suited to those kind of players, rather than aging stars looking for a final payday. That's what you don't want to see at any club. I mean, Lewandowski would be amazing, but I don't see how that makes sense for either party, really.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we actually got to talk too much about another really big move in Europe of Sadio Mane going to Bayern. Is that as big of a loss for Liverpool as it sounds like on the surface, bearing in mind they brought Darwin Núñez in? And is that something that's just destined to get Bayern competing for the Champions League again? I feel like that seems like an amazing move.
Yeah, it's a bigger loss than I think Liverpool are letting on. I think
Mm.
he provided so much to that team that replacing him is going to be difficult. They've signed a few players with promise, definitely, but
Mm.
it's still an element of a gamble there for Jurgen Klopp because it was such a settled front three. It's one of the most settled front threes in European football, and you could tell the goals were flowing from all of them. So yeah, it is a huge loss to Liverpool. Will he produce in the Bundesliga? Yeah, absolutely. I think he is built for a team like Bayern. I think they'll get goals out of him, plenty of goals out of him. He talked about wanting to further his ambition somewhere else and achieve new things. I don't think he's going to achieve any more than he's achieved at Liverpool. To be fair, because he won the Champions League with them and he had so much success there. I just think at this stage of his career, to make a move like that is a smart move for him anyway, just to stay at that level for a bit longer. Because
Yeah.
where do you go after a Liverpool team that was that successful? It has to be somewhere like Bayern Munich, doesn't it? Really. I wouldn't have liked to have seen him go somewhere like La Liga. I don't think that would have worked for him.
No.
So yeah, it feels like that is the move that really keeps him at the level he needs to be at. So yeah, fair play.
And it could free someone from that Bayern front line up for a move, if not Lewandowski. Serge Gnabry is also entering the last year of his contract, and there's been talk of him potentially returning to England at either Arsenal or even Manchester United. Would you be interested in that as a United fan, seeing Gnabry over at United?
Yeah, he's a talented guy, isn't he? I think also he's somebody I think someone like Chelsea would look at. The German connector there, isn't it? I think he's an upgrade on what they've already got. So yeah, Gnabry is underrated, I think, in England because of his spell with Arsenal. I don't think he got the chance to really shine. And he went on loan to West Brom, didn't he, as well, under Tony Pulis, I believe.
Yeah, Tony Pulis is West Brom. He didn't work out there. So can he work out in Ten Hag's United?
Well, that's the thing. I think he's tied with that kind of vision in England, and there's so much more to his game than that. But I think English fans don't quite appreciate. So yeah, he'd work with an Arteta Arsenal team definitely, and I think he'd work with a Ten Hag United team as well. But I think the team that probably needs to play like him most is Chelsea.
But speaking of players who didn't quite work out in the Premier League but may shine in Germany, Sebastian Haller is signed for Borussia Dortmund officially today as well. I don't think any of us saw that coming when he left West Ham for Ajax, did we?
No. Do you know what though? Dortmund as well is another one worth mentioning because they signed Adeyemi as well. So within minutes of losing Haaland, they announced that signing. So another team that's really kind of tuned into what the team needs, replacing players that have gone on for big money straight away. They've done that historically, haven't they? With really, really promising players. So yeah, the fact they've got Haller as well has had that experience that I think they need. And yeah, it's a good move for him. He went to Amsterdam and absolutely tore up the Eredivisie. He's been brilliant in the Champions League, so he can play at the highest level. But yeah, he's a far cry from the player who struggled at West Ham, isn't he? He really is. It's a nice story.
It just leaves you thinking, who are Ajax actually going to field next season? It's going to be Dusan Tadic on his own when Ten Hag's ripped the rest of them apart, and then we've had a few move elsewhere as well. It's a shame to see what was actually a really nice team broken up. Reminds me of that Monaco side with Mbappe, Silva, Fabinho, when as soon as you get a bit of success, you just get picked off, sadly. But that's what the transfer market is. That's what it will continue to do for the rest of the summer. We'll keep keeping our eye on what we can, and hopefully you will be a bit more positive next time. United will have signed a couple more players maybe, or Ronaldo will have done a U-turn and said he's really committed. We'll see. But whatever happens, I'm sure it'll be massive, and we'll be here to talk about it. Until then, thank you for joining us, as always. Always appreciate the support. Check out our YouTube channel for any of the other videos where we've talked about transfers that might be coming up. Me and Dave have probably already been proved wrong on about 6 of them that have moved to other clubs, unfortunately, but you can still laugh at us if you like to. You can also follow us on our socials, which you'll see above Mike's head. And of course, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere else that you tend to find it. So thank you again for your support. Thank you, Mike, for joining me.
No worries, mate. Pleasure.
And we'll look forward to seeing you next time we get to talk. Thank you again.